In this video, we'll start talking about arrays, which is a way to store our data in our code. So the expected outcome of this module is after we complete this module, you should be able to understand and create arrays, and we will be able to use loops to process arrays. We will also talk about some array methods and how to pass arrays as arguments and return arrays as output. We will also create and distinguish one-dimensional and multi-dimensional and ragged arrays. So what are arrays and why do we need arrays? So previously we were able to create some variables in our code, but then each variable can hold only a single data item. So what about if I have large number of items, say list of friends or list of numbers? How many variables do I need to declare? Do I need to declare many variables? For example, if I have a list of, let's say, 100 friends, will I say friend 1, and then friend 2, and then friend 3, through friend number 100? In some cases, this may be doable if I have 3 or 4 friends, but even if you go the tedious route of creating all of those variables, the problem comes when you try to process them. So if I want some kind of a method or basically a piece of code that is going to print all of my friends, will I need to write them line by line, like one by one, print them one by one? This is basically rewriting code. Can we avoid this? The answer is yes, and here comes arrays to help us. So let's think of a grocery list. So declaring the items might not be a problem. So string, and then I have item 1, item 2, 3, throughout n, which is going to be the number of my items. Now when I want to initialize those, I will go one by one, so probably one line each. But then when I want to process them, let's say I want to print my list, or better yet, I want to search my list to see if I have this item in my list or not. So can I have everything in one divided container? So I refer to my container by one name, and that name will have places inside the container, and then I can access the first place, second place, and so on. The answer is yes, and this is what we call an array. So we can include everything in a container, call it grocery list, and then each item is going to be called an element in the array, and it will have its own spot, and those are going to be numbered from 0 to n. Now keep in mind, this is the same case with strings. We have seen strings having, let's say, 10 characters. The indices are going to start from 0 to 9. Same thing with the arrays. Now to access any item or element in our array, we will have to start with the container's name, which is the array name, along with the spot number that tells me where that element is. So eventually it is going to look something like this. So I have my items listed one by one in my array, and these are the indices. So as we said, we'll start from 0 to n, or if you want to be more specific, it is going to be n minus 1, because remember I have 7 items in here, but my last index is going to be index number 6. Now those are my elements in my array, and those are the indices. Now the whole thing is going to have the name, for example, grocery list. And inside my grocery list, my element number 0, which is going to be my first element, is going to be item 1, element number 1, is going to be item, or at index 1 is going to be the second the element containing the item number 2, and so on until we reach the last one. Now we know how it works or how it looks, but how can we use it in our Java code? So basically, how can I create an array in Java? So the first thing is I will need to declare my array. So let's look at the general syntax. I will start with the data type and then follow it with the square brackets and then the array name. Now this is very similar to how we define variables. So we started with data type, whether it's an integer, double, string, or whatever type that we want to define, and then we follow it with the name. Now the difference here is we will include the square brackets to signify that this is an array. Now this is going to just declare the array. So for example, let me see, this is the way I can create an array of strings. So I will say string and then square brackets, square brackets, and then follow it with the string name or the string array name. Similarly, double square brackets, and then I will have scores listed in my array. So note that this is only going to create a variable name that is linked to a collection of elements. Now, how do we create the actual elements? How do we add elements to the array? So we allocated spaces for them, and we need to allocate spaces for them in the memory. Basically, we need to say how many elements do we need to store in the array, and then we will be able to put those elements in the memory. So the general syntax is after we define the first part, so this is the previous part we just talked about, data type, and then square brackets, array name. Now we will say equals to new data type, which is the same data type we used here, and then in the square brackets we will basically provide the number of elements we want in our array. So recall the friends array that we just talked about. If we want to create an array that is going to store 10 friend names, this is how we will do it. String and then square brackets to say that this is an array, and then it's going to be called friends, which is equal to a new string array of size 10, and this is how we read it. Now this is how to initialize it. Keep in mind that there is more than one way to initialize the array. Specifically, we'll talk about 2 ways to initialize an array. Remember when we talked about regular data types, we can declare in one line and then initialize in the other line. So let's look at arrays and see how is that going to look like. First way is to enter elements by index. So I will say at a specific index I want to store a specific value. Assuming that you are dealing with our friends array, so I will say, okay, friends of 0 is equal to John, friends of 1 is equal to Mark, and so on. That says at the position 0, which is index 0, that is the first index in my array, store the value John. At index 1, which is the second element in my array, store the value Mark. Now another way is basically we can declare an initialize in the same line, and this is how it is going to look like. So we'll say string array friends is equal to, now we don't have to say string array of any size, we just list our values separated by commas inside curly brackets. Java is going to do the work for us and count the number of elements, and will create the array accordingly. So we do not have to specify the number of elements when we do this procedure. So let's go and create some arrays and see how we can add elements to them. So I will go and create a new Java class, and let me call my class arrays, and I will have a main method in there, and this is going to be my class. So let me go and create the same friends array. So again, as we said, it is going to be the data type, which is string, and then 2 square brackets to tell that this is an array, and then friends, okay, is equal to new string array of size, let me have it 3 because I will just add 3 friends in there. Now I can go ahead and say friends at position 0 is equal to John, for example, and a semicolon. Similarly, I can do the same and store friends at positions 1 and 2. Now keep in mind this has 3 friends, so the last index is not 3, but it's 2, because if I go 3, then I'm out of the array and I will get a problem that says array index out of bounds, and we will see an example of this. Let's just have a third name, Jack, for example. So if I save this and try to run it later on, I'll not have any problem. Now even if I say friends at 3, it is not going to give me any compile time error, but it's going to be a runtime error, which is going to be an exception that is going to be displayed in my console. So to avoid that exception, I will have to make sure that I'm not exceeding my array. Now let's see how we can declare another array. So another integer array, let me call it just numbers, is equal to, and then I will say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for example, and this is another array that I just created.